I'm standing in a Minecraft nation that became a regional juggernaut through its secret ideology of diplomacy and storytelling. How did they do this? By fighting insurgents, YouTubers, zombie viruses, and necromancers, of course. Today we're looking at the kingdom of Anglunia, and its growth from a little village into a resilient empire and a shining capital of world building, all on the Stoneworks Minecraft server and its fantasy civilizations in the world of Eldom. The world of Eldom was changed forever when Aphaz the Traveler rode from the faraway lands of Rathnir, discovering it Columbus style in the year 61 of the Traveler's era. This set about a period of colonization that saw many people grow into massive civilizations. The icy lands of Anglunia's north were controlled by mingling families of Yirsi ice elves and humans, until the Rathnirian nation of Viadoxa colonized it with a money-hungry corporation, the Austeri Plagosi Trading Company. As they set up shop there, 3 native lords named Elyani, Baizil, and Prinobots, alongside the foreign warlord Welpish, met on Mount Eros and built a castle, and from here Anglunia was first established. Their community was at first very small, and so they ran the country together as a tetrarchy of the 4 great lords. But Elyani of the House of Blizun became a kind of figurehead queen when talking with new players or making announcements for the country. The 4 great lords were all friends in real life, and as Anglunia started growing under them, they ruled their own regions and cooperated on everything. The first challenges arose during Elyani taking Blizun's reign as figurehead queen. One batshit crazy player named Commodore Rasa came and stole from their city, so they burned his desert base down. They then discovered the small colonial town of Myrtle nearby, so they strong-armed them into signing a treaty to join. Great Lord Welpish and one of their counselors named Johnny D. Jackson bought the rest of the colonial land up, and so they finally had themselves a proper territory on the map. But just as this happened, Anglunia got roped into a local war as their neighbor Andor invaded their other neighbor of Lechia. In these battles, Anglunia came out on top with Welpish killing 10 attackers all at once, and so the Andorans fled, and Anglunia split up its territory. But later on, there was a conspiracy where that batshit crazy Commodore Rasa and another player formed a conspiracy to get Anglunia invaded and to blow up their castle. I made a short video on this, but it's like kind of mean, so that's gonna stay exclusive for the members of my channel. A casual mention to like and subscribe. Click, ding, haha. This clown war, as it was called, kinda worked itself out though, as the conspiracy fell apart and Commodore Rasa was murdered in his church by roving bandits. But then came a new wave of migrants that would cause unprecedented levels of trouble, for one of them was a YouTuber. You see, this YouTuber named Leo settled a new town under Anglunia called Austonia. Leo and his gang invited many of the Anglunian nobles to talk over the group's vassalship at an in-game dinner. However, as soon as everyone was in place, assassins jumped out of the walls and murdered them all. Leo actually made a really good video on it if you want to check it out, but after this victory at the dinner, Anglunia invaded in full force on the disorganized rebellion in Austonia, and they decisively smashed it.
Woo! Yeah, baby! No one takes Stoics players out on our turf! Let's f***ing go!
Now, I've thrown 4 or 5 events at you under the Great Lords that are pretty common among Minecraft nations. They're trying to get a foothold, there are some outside enemies, and they're learning how to grapple with all these things. But I'll argue that under the surface here, these players were developing a secret strategy that allowed Anglunia to continuously grow, eventually into a regional power, and one of the most long-lasting communities in all of Minecraft history. So let's go over this ideology that they've dubbed as Anglunism. Here, I'll make a communist flag version of it just for you Hoi 4 players. Anglunist flag, yay. I believe this ideology of gameplay is based on, at this point in the story, 5 interconnected pillars of their state and society. Social cohesion, prioritizing peace and stability over short-term power grabs, building friendships and trustworthy alliances with neighbors, a strong defensive military, particularly through Welpish's friendship with powerful mercenary groups, and most importantly for growing their influence, opportunistic annexations through diplomacy. This strategy of gameplay is suited to maximize the stability of your own community and the good relations that you have with others. This means that Anglunia never got involved with those frequent large coalition wars that rock Eldom from time to time, just for land or money or something. But they will get involved with wars in order to help their allies out, which is why there are so many under the reign of Yersidan Zero Zelzar Rezaraya. By not causing drama and maintaining good local friendships, when their neighbors' governments over time become inactive, unstable, threatened by outside forces, or pushed off their land, they often willingly give or sell their territory and people over to Anglunia, because they know that the Anglunians are chill, and they expect that they'll have a good time getting closer to them. Now, of course, this takes a long time because you're playing the waiting game for your neighbors to destabilize or collapse, but since your group is purposefully not causing drama and having fun doing their own thing in the game, there's not the burnout or the exhaustion that other governments often feel from their diplomacy. This tactic of peaceful expansion is how Anglunia managed to annex the nations of Bel Ismer, Soliana, Shurida, Araveyi, Abaddon, Novastonia, the Pale, Wolfswood, Great Polikos, Merconis, and more across the world. So at its core, Anglinism is an ideology that says, don't try to be the strongest or most glorious nation in your region. Just try to be the most stable, fun, and friendly, and the people will naturally gravitate towards you over time. And I think this is a cool subversion of how players usually try to play the geopolitical game. So, knowing this, when we left off on the chronology, Anglunia just squashed a civil war that had all their nobles murdered. So clearly, this goddamn YouTuber threw a wrench into their social cohesion and their stability. Obviously, that's bad. So the Lords and Johnny D. Jackson sat down to create a new constitution with some reforms that would hopefully tie their citizens to the government a little bit more. They started to vet players who wanted to settle land in Anglunia, had them swear fealty, and they set up a democratic council called the Vindyi so that they could vote on certain proposals. This was a time of shifting powers, but around then, the Great Lords became elderly and unfit to rule. They tried to pass on their power to a new tetrarchy of players, but Johnny D. Jackson was the only one with any governing experience, so through his protest he was able to secure the throne for himself, and with this, it became a real constitutional monarchy. Anglunia then shifted to a new kind of state, a real monarchy that maintained this whole Anglinism thing, but with one more pillar added to it: roleplay. You see, one of the main ways to play Stoneworks is to roleplay. You create a fantasy character with a backstory and a new personality that you play as with other people. Johnny D. Jackson has kind of proved to be the king of this. Cause Anglunia's lore, the population of Yirsi Ice Elves, its Yirsi Tal Khanlang, its Ardurnian gods, and the dozen lineages of great houses, all of these things are either made up or choreographed by him. This is why you see Johnny D. Jackson playing multiple roles on the Monarchy, as he's played multiple characters with multiple stories. Imagine like you're playing a giant D&D campaign where no one is really the dungeon master. So as an example, this brings me to the horrific crisis under Johnny D. Jackson's first character, the Yirsidan Yinawur Dalis Nuin, from the Great House of Nuin. In the years when Eldom was steeped in eternal night because vampires had blocked out the sun, Anglunia entered into a war against an army controlled by a parasitic virus. In the country to Anglunia's south, the Ostrakhan-Wandenreich Empire, or as everyone likes to spam in the chat, I love the AWE! One player named Cab of Aaron was mining in a cave when he encountered a red fungus that glue an ancient glow and softly whispered the old languages of this world before it was known by man. The fungus infected Cab with a nightmarish disease known as the Nihernschbreed, which slowly takes over its host, creating an army of hollow shells sucked of their minds and souls, increasingly driven mad and propelled to spread the virus at any cost. Well, Patient Zero Cab had a stew store in the Anglunian town of Myrtle, and as he worked there, the red fungus spread to its walls, and he began giving away free shipments of stew to all those around him. Surely enough, the disease spread, and some Anglunians saw the forming crisis as their friends and family turned sick with red eyes. One Anglunian, the player Diamond Kid 09290, started a resistance movement to combat the infected. They prepared war and medical gear and scoured the land for anyone infected so they could isolate them and quell the outbreak. But in their travels, they found an island town off the AWE named Agora that was fully enveloped by the Nihernschbreed fungus. It was not long after this that King Yinawur Dalis Nuin became infected, and the resistance went into overdrive trying to find a cure. By experimenting with many chemicals, plants, and poisons on unwilling subjects, they found a treatment based on tea that would soothe and slow the effects. With this treatment and masked suits, the resistance sent a surprise assault into Agora, and after a short fight, they were able to push the infected off the island, and they forced Cab Varen into signing a treaty that isolated the Nihirnspreed and kept it out of Anglunia. But the virus had been working in many other places too, and soon Cab summoned a greater force of the infected, and in a long battle they scratched and clawed the inches of their island back, driving the resistance out of their base. As the resistance recuperated, they found that their leader Diamond had been infected. As they tried to build up their strength again, he slowly turned mad. And to the infected, he betrayed over classified information on the resistance, its members, medical findings, and lab sites. So the infected launched a surprise attack on the resistance, taking many of its members and destroying their labs. There was intense fighting in the streets of Myrtle, but the resistance pushed them back and saved their main base. With their progress so far destroyed, Chancellor Sidja Goldnir took over the resistance and tried to rebuild. One of King Yniwer's daughters, who was in the resistance, caught the Nihirnspreed, and she died. At a long-planned wedding soon after, the guests saw that the king was rendered a bit unstable, and they speculated. Was he mad with grief? Was the Nihirnspreed digging through his brain? Was he poisoned by an experimental remedy given to him by his friend? Or was the curse of the mad house of Newen finally catching up to him? None could say until the reception of the wedding, where he stood atop the temple and shouted a cordial goodbye. The second Yirsidan of Anglunia then jumped to his death among the horrified wedding guests below. Yniwer's daughter, Eliowyn Yniwer Newen, then took the throne as the Yirsidani. Sidja Goldnir spent several days trying to convince her to unite the kingdom's military with the resistance movement, but Eliowyn was deeply distrustful of this paramilitary group. But as this went on, Sidja Goldnir was kidnapped by the infected and brought to the castle on Agora Island. So Eliowyn finally called up the military and the resistance, and they invaded the island once again. The base's giant flower spewed spores into the air, turning the wind into a conquering poison. They donned their masks and cut their way through the infected hordes, and they tore down the flower that spewed the fungus. But in the captured castle's basement, they found their kidnapped resistance leader bound and tortured, showing the early signs of infection. Eliowyn took Cab Varen and ordered that the infected stay out of Anglunia, lest they come back with torch and lava to eradicate them. The Nihirnspreed could do their own thing to other countries so long as it never touched Anglunia again. But in a bit of a tricky act of compromise, she also criminalized the resistance movement. The resistance then moved underground and reorganized as a movement called the Divided, and continued to fight the Nihirnspreed outside of their borders. Sidja Goldnir's infection could not be healed with all of their experimental cures, and so, in her final act, she used her last shred of sanity to go to Cab Varen's old stew shop where it all started, and she cleansed it with fire and lava, and later, she died. The Nihirnspreed saw its most crushing defeat at this third battle of Agora, so even while operating internationally, it eventually died out and was confined to the deepest, darkest corners of Eldom. This story reads like a movie. Needless to say, Anglunia shines its brightest when you look back at these incredible roleplay stories that these players have come up with. And they have a lot more too, like the time the Great Lords were resurrected as undead liches, and they started a crisis by rounding up all the royalist opponents and massacring them in the capital square. Or when the monarchy fell into a legitimacy crisis, and an 11-year civil war sparked that ended in both claimants to the throne dueling on a bridge. And the story that they just finished, where an old god was resurrected and her cult stole the Anglunian crown. These events are just as deep and dramatic as the Nihirnspreed saga, so the Anglunians have tons of deep lore tied to their national identity and their characters' stories, if you're into that kind of thing. So perhaps you can already see how this benefits Anglunia's community and geopolitical situation. So I'm gonna add the sixth pillar of Johnny D. Jackson's revolutionary roleplay into the idea of Anglonism. He tells me that since everyone in Anglunia is essentially writing out a D&D campaign together, it's huge for maintaining their social cohesion. No one's gonna launch a real coup when your characters' arcs are tangled together in a storyline, and it keeps the community active and interested. Anglunia's history is therefore not a bunch of threats and wars and coups like other nations I've covered. No, it's fun. It's a bunch of stories that were made up together by friends, and somehow, in this genius way of the 6 pillars of modern Anglonism, it's given them stability, longevity, a regional empire with many happy subjects, and a real legacy that all of Stoneworks can be proud of. So, if you want to join Anglunia, join them on the world of Eldom at play.stoneworks.gg. God, my voice is going. I'll see you there.